Don't you find it scurrilous reading these reports in the news today of all the families trying to get home, trying to sort out trying to get their families home in time for school, in time for jobs, and facing a wall of silence from the airline companies, from the various government departments who are supposed to be providing help, from insurance, and nobody seems to know anything. Nobody seems to care, because all they're worried about is apportioning blame about how did the air traffic control system go down. In the end, we have to say, we're in an international crisis at the moment with Russia and Ukraine. And we are so vulnerable. We have just demonstrated our vulnerability. It would take nothing to attack our country, because we are so monumentally and so ostentatiously vulnerable and chaotic. Vulnerable and chaotic. We cannot look after our own. How on earth could we look after anybody else in a moment of crisis? Crisis is all around us, and we are useless. And more than that, we are transferring that responsibility, which should be taken by the airline companies, by the government, by insurance. That's why we pay. That's why we pay taxes. That's why we pay a premium for insurance. That's why we pay for our tickets in advance, so that if there is a crisis, we can be sure that we are going to be treated fairly and promptly and efficiently, and we're not going to be left for a week before our next flight. We're going to be flown home immediately, or bussed home, or whatever. But this idea that we can leave people in limbo for a week, for 2 weeks, wring our hands and say, well, we can't offer you any compensation, and, you make your own arrangements, and it's pathetic. It's utterly pathetic. All these people who are doing this should lose their jobs. It's so simple, because their jobs are worthless, and that goes right the way up to the top of government. This is where our government should be stepping in. But, if it can't sort out the Afghan crisis, how on earth can it sort out a crisis like this? It's one after another where our government doesn't recognise its responsibility to its people, to the people who elected it. It is time. It is time for a rethink. Now, I'm not saying it's time for a general election, because I don't think a Labour government would actually have any more sense about what to do than a Conservative government. It's time for a rethink of the ethical and moral responsibilities that our ministers have when they are elected to office. It's time for a rethink about what the rail operators, what their responsibility is. Because we've got ULEZ coming in at the same time as we've got a strike. So if you want to get to London, if you have no choice but to go to London next Friday or Saturday, you have no choice but to go by car. No choice at all. Because even if you were to drive to the edge of the ULEZ zone, there are no trains to take you into London. You can't even use the underground because it doesn't go that far out. This is taking money with menaces. This is an abusive system. Utterly, utterly abusive. It doesn't matter whether it's got some sort of climate change defence, whether it's good for the planet. It's not been thought through. And the same thing is true about migration. It doesn't matter what the purpose might be to abuse migrants and to try and discourage them from coming here. If you haven't set up safe and legal routes, then you haven't done your job. And all of this comes down to the chaos, the confusion, and the moral incontinence of Suella Braverman, the current Home Secretary. And this isn't to exonerate Priti Patel or Theresa May or Amber, because they're all at it. They're all doing the same thing. They're moving their pen around a piece of paper that they haven't properly read. and they don't really know what they're doing. So it's all about authority and ignorance, and that combination is not a nice combination. It's not attractive to see or to suffer.